Baptisms are happening November 27th at both services. If you're ready to take the plunge and announce your commitment to Jesus and to Lakeview, it's time to get baptized. Class in preparation for baptism is November 17th from 7 to 9 p.m. Interested? Email me at allison@lakeviewchurch.com or visit me at the newsstand.
December and Christmas will be here before you know it, and along with that, all the festivities, including the Mom's Christmas celebration. Ladies, mark your calendars for Thursday, December 1st, as we usher in this most wonderful season. We have lined up a great speaker, yummy dessert, and of course, our famous silent auction. You won't want to miss it. Tickets will be $12 in advance or $15 at the door, and will go on sale in the next couple of weeks here at the church and on Pick-a-Tick. So watch the information card for more details. And Merry Christmas.
Lakeview 201 is for those interested in participating in the story of God by engaging Lakeview's mission and postures. The class will unpack Lakeview's postures and help you identify your gifts and the way that you can use those gifts in life at Lakeview. Lakeview 201 will be offered Thursday, November 24th from 6 to 9 p.m. Supper will be provided. For more information or to sign up, visit me here at the newsstand.
So those are your announcements. For more information, just head to the homepage of lakeviewchurch.com.
This week we continue a series that we began last week entitled Sex, Money, and the Story of Ruth. And the big question we had last week was this: where do you find yourself in this story? Because this story just isn't a story about some girl from thousands of years ago. What we learned last week, that this is a story for those of us who feel that we've lost everything, that we've suffered great pain and great loss. But this is a story for those of us who are here who feel like we have history with other people, and that history disables us from being healthy and moving forward in life. This story is about people who feel like God is just way too quiet in their lives. And it's like you're screaming for God just to say something, please. This is the kind of story for people who have this weird feeling that God only really shows up in the good and awesome times in life, and then he loses his power or jurisdiction when things are bad or broken or painful. This story is a reminder for us that God gives us a lifetime warranty on our lives for parts and service, and no matter how bad we break it, God still redeems and validates it. Why? Because God likes it when we do our thing. God likes it when we are open and honest and unedited with our feelings towards him, because that is where he does his very best work. So with that, I want to move into the second chapter of Ruth this morning. And the things I want to talk about are these things. This morning I want to talk a little bit about luck. This morning we want to talk just a little bit about the refugee crisis and how it impacts the world and Canada and Saskatoon and us as Christians. And then I want to round it off by talking a bit about what happens when you think a madman has just inherited the White House. Another timely message from Reverend Manifold. Here we go. Ruth chapter 2 rolls like this. It just so happened that Naomi had a relative by marriage, a man prominent and rich, connected with Elimelech's family. His name was Boaz. And one day Ruth, the Moabite foreigner, said to Naomi, I'm going to work. I'm going out to glean among the sheaves, following after some harvesters who will treat me kindly. And Naomi said, go ahead, dear daughter. And so she set out, and she went and started gleaning in a field, following in the wake of the harvesters. Eventually, she ended up in the part of the field owned by Boaz, her father-in-law Elimelech's relative. And a little later, Boaz came out from Bethlehem greeting his harvesters, God be with you. And they replied, and God bless you. And Boaz asked his young servant, who was the foreman over the farms, hey, who's that young woman? Where did she come from? And the foreman said, why, that's the Moabite girl, the one who came with Naomi from the country of Moab. She asked for permission. Let me glean, she said, and gather among the sheaves following after your harvesters. And she's been at it steady ever since, from early morning until now, without so much as a break. So the opening of chapter 2 here in Ruth starts with this amazing term. It just so happened. Or when she shows up on Boaz's field, it says eventually here, but the actual language here, I looked it up, is this. As luck would have it, Ruth shows up here. And then when Boaz shows on the scene, the original language says, behold, Boaz. So you and I first read this and say, what? Really, as luck would have it, behold Boaz? It's like this weird Romeo and Juliet thing come together. Do Christians believe in luck, really? What the author is doing here for you and I is this. He's given us a wink, wink and a nudge, nudge. And he's saying, yeah, from Ruth's perspective, it seems like she just stumbled onto this and it just magically happened, as luck would have it. But you and I, the informed reader, with this 30,000-foot view, we look and say, nah, that's not luck. God's up to something here. They can't see it, but we can see it. And of course, Ruth is unaware because she is in this headspace where who is she? She's just a woman, just a foreigner, just a refugee, just a Moabite. Why would the God of Israel pay any attention to her? And you and I sometimes are caught in that same trap. We feel like God is only this lofty, out there, big, huge God out in the stars. And he is all that. Lots of grandeur. Grand God, of course. But God is also a very personal God, a high-touch God who cares for the individual, and he spends special attention looking after and taking notice of the outsider. And that's who Ruth is. And you heard it in the language of the farmhand here, and we're going to hear it as Ruth speaks about herself as we continue to read. She always feels like and is classified as the oppressed foreigner, the outsider, the refugee. The farmhand said she's the Moabite from Moab. Remember we talked about the Moabites last week? Remember their relationship to Israel? Back it up, right? Remember? The Moabites are this like inbred people. Remember that part? Mental image? Yeah, you thought about that this week, right? So that's where they start. Then they put like curses on Israel. They pay for that. And then when Israel is fleeing from Egypt, the Moabites don't give them food, water, bread, whatever. So there's history with these people. So when the farmhand says she is the Moabite girl from Moab, he's saying, ugh, she's not a person. She's not even a woman. She's just a foreigner. So poor Ruth can't escape it. She is always being classified as this person who comes from some other place, who doesn't belong. She is Ruth, the refugee. And God knows that you and I can have the same feelings as this farmhand. Whenever we are confronted with people that we are afraid of or that we are unsure about, when we feel threatened in any way, we can talk and act like that. And you've heard the language before, right? Especially in the last few years, the way the media has talked about refugees. Refugees are scary. We don't want them here. Who are these people? What kinds of refugees? All refugees are terrorists. We villainize them. We distance ourselves from them. And even if you've never said those things out loud, even if you're not a political leader who controls borders, if we're honest with ourselves, and I know it's happened to me, that some of those feelings bubble up. Refugees, really? Like right here, right? Oh man, what's this all about? Meanwhile, God knows those bubbling feelings. God knows the way this is working out. So what he does from close to the very beginning is that he hardwires some clear instructions for his people when it comes to looking after those people that you wouldn't naturally look after. So let's back up the train here a little bit and take a quick peek at the book of Leviticus. By the way, you know that we're spending 14 weeks in the book of Leviticus in the new year, right? You've looked in your journal that far. Guys, you know what you're going to say to me after that series? You're going to say, Joe, that is the best and only series I've ever heard on the book of Leviticus. You're going to love it. So here's a bit of a sneak peek. It says this, furthermore, when you harvest the produce of your land, this is God talking, you are not to harvest all the way to the corners of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and the who? And the resident alien. I am the Lord your God. This is the law. This is the practice that Boaz is following here. He's leaving the edge of his property. He's leaving the scraps, the leftovers on the ground. Why? Because he is looking after those who are unable to look after themselves. And in doing so, he's honoring God, he's honoring the refugees, and he's honoring the poor. And he's doing it because looking after those in need is what God requires. So anytime you hear anybody ever bad-mouthing the poor or refugees, or they got themselves into this problem, it's not my problem, know that those words, those thoughts, those sentiments, those ideas are not godly. That's actually the opposite of what God wants for you and I and for them. But here's the trouble. We're modern-day people, right? And if it's not the refugees, it's somebody else. There's always needs and things piling up. The world's going to hell in a handbasket. And because we have access to social media, the whole world's problems descend on us in this age like never before. And we feel like we do our best to help and to give and to participate. But even with all the good work that we do, sometimes it feels like we're not even putting a dent into what's happening in the world. We want to do what God is asking us to do, to help, but it feels like it's never enough. And maybe you have felt this pain, you felt this tension, right? When Lakeview Church brings a good need before you, you step up and you give. And 10 out of 10 times, Lakeview does that and blows it out of the water. But Lakeview asks, and then your kids have stuff at school, the school has asks and needs from you, and then the Girl Guides show up on your doorstep with their tasty treats, and they have needs from you. And then the sports teams show up at your door, they want your empties, and you might be a pastor and you're embarrassed about how many empties you have, and it's kind of awkward, you don't want to give them all. So that whole thing happens. I don't know, it doesn't happen to me, right? And now you listen to what's happening in the news, and it's bleak. Every day there's always something. And we're living in that tension. I want to do right, I want to give, I want to help. But it's so draining, I'm just tired of giving. And this is a trend that psychologists have picked up on, and they actually call it compassion fatigue. And I want to give you a quick primer on it here this morning. It goes like this. Compassion fatigue is a decline in a person's capacity to feel empathy and compassion towards the suffering of others. It has been found in people who work directly with traumatized victims in heart-wrenching emotional environments. Nurses, caregivers, psychotherapists, animal rescue workers, first responders. And in general, frequently watching images and reading stories of widespread tragedy may bring about emotional exhaustion while influencing people to become desensitized, cynical, and resistant to helping those who are suffering. In addition to personal implications, compassion fatigue is in the general public has societal implications as well, especially when mass donations are needed for large-scale disasters. Living in a globalized society means exposure to tragedy and suffering around the world. Avoiding or denying this tragedy and suffering is only a short-term solution. A more balanced approach is to stay informed about the world, increasing our knowledge and understanding of people outside of our own communities, while also staying informed about ourselves, knowing when to engage the news of disturbing events and when to engage in active self-care. Personal story for you here. There was a time in my pastoral career when I went overboard in trying to look after people and their needs. I took a sabbatical. Some of my friends who are sitting here this morning said it was more of a stress leave. They're probably right. I was so consumed with the problems of the people around me, those that I loved, that it totally wore me out. And I wanted to give help. And I was compassionate for these people, but it was killing me. And I didn't pick up on the signs till much later. You know what was happening to me? I would have nightmares about people that I loved. So I'd be walking with them in the stress and trouble of their day, and those same stresses would translate into my overnight. So it's like I had no rest, no break from this, and I would wake up frustrated, tired, sweaty, worried about what I just felt in my dreams. During that point, I actually went to the dentist, and she asked me, she says, how are you sleeping these days? I'm like, oh, it's funny you should ask. I'm waking up and my jaw is just killing every morning. And she said, I know. I said, how do you know? She says, you're obviously grinding your teeth at night. Has it ever happened to you? I said, no. She says, here, have a mouth guard, wear it at night. Great, thanks. It sort of helps, but it doesn't solve the real issue. And I would put little barriers in there to try to help things out, like paying for call display on my phone, which was the best $5 a month I could have ever spent at that time. Why? Because I knew when I saw a certain name come up on that screen, and it would grip me with fear because I knew where that conversation was going to go. I just couldn't take it. I didn't take the call. Just let it go to voicemail. And I know that danger still exists in me. Perhaps it exists in you as well. Or I want to say to the world, screw it, I'm out. I can't do anymore. And maybe you felt this feeling before, because I surely did. I would say to myself, listen, I'll take care of me, you take care of you, and then everyone will be looked after. In the meantime, leave me alone. And that sounds awfully similar to where we saw Naomi in chapter 1, remember? Friends, I think that you and I are in danger of suffering from compassion fatigue, of overextending ourselves and drowning ourselves in legitimate needs, or just tapping out saying, I'm done, I'm out, it's enough. And I think that Ruth's story is able to speak into that situation for us, even now. Ruth's story is an acknowledgement that yes, our world is broken, and no, this isn't the way things are supposed to be. But our challenge in the middle of that trouble is to be keenly aware of the resident alien, of the broken pieces of our world, to look after the needs of our world, but to carefully balance those needs alongside our capabilities and our natural limits. Because here's the thing. If you are destroying yourself on the way to helping and looking after others, that's not what God wants for you. Or if your friends are sick and tired of your rants and guilt trips because you are forcing your convictions on them, God has no time for that. He's not interested in that. He's not asking that of you. Or if you become so zeroed in and consumed with whatever cause is before you at the expense of your health and your family, that's not what God wants either. So here's where I hope you can find some encouragement this morning. It's in this, that yes, participate in what God is up to, but remember at the same time, it's not all up to you. There's one Messiah, and it ain't you. It is not your job or responsibility to heal and save the world. And one of the things that will help us on that route is to keep the big picture. Here's a glimpse again from Ruth's story. Then Boaz spoke to Ruth, listen, my daughter, from now on, don't go to any other field to glean. Stay right here in this one and stay close to my young women. Watch where they are harvesting and follow them. And don't worry about a thing. I've given orders to my servants not to harass you. Interesting point. And when you get thirsty, feel free to go and drink from the water buckets that the servants have filled. And she dropped to her knees and bowed her face to the ground. How does this happen that you should pick me out and treat me so kindly, me, a foreigner? You see how she's even talking about herself? And Boaz answered her, I've heard all about you. Heard about the way you treated your mother-in-law after the death of her husband, and how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and have come to live among a bunch of total strangers. God rewards you well for what you've done, and with a generous bonus besides from God, to whom you've come seeking protection under his wings. Those last three words are about to blow your mind. Let me break it down for you here. There is a combination of words and terms here. There is a word play going on that's going to stretch throughout the scriptures, and we're going to follow the thread here around the idea of wings and edges and land and garments and tassels. It's going to blow your mind. So let's back things up. I want to look at a couple of the scriptures from before here that are going to expand on this. The first one is from Numbers. You guys want to do a series in Numbers at some point? You think it's funny? Don't test me. I'll do it. We'll make it happen. First from Numbers and then Psalms. Numbers says this. God spoke to Moses, speak to the people of Israel and tell them that from now on they are to make tassels on the corners of their garments and to mark each corner tassel with a blue thread. And when you look at these tassels, you'll remember and keep all the commandments of God and not get distracted by everything you feel or see that seduces you into infidelities. The tassels will signal remembrance and observance of all my commandments to live a holy life to God. I am your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt to be your personal God. Yes, I am God, your God. Now hang on to that. And now let's skip over to Psalms. Psalm 91 says, He, God, will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and fortress. Okay, let's start putting the pieces together here. What's being said? Just like in Ruth, these scriptures are acknowledging that things aren't the way they're supposed to be, that the world is broken and God actually knows it. But it's also a sign, it's part of the thread here, that God isn't just this lofty God who's far away, but he's a hands-on God who provides shelter for those who need refuge. And who needs refuge? Refugees. So what does he do? God instructs his people that on the edges of their garments, and then later on the edges of their prayer shawls, that they would attach tassels on the corner. And this is a visual reminder to people of who they are and who made them and what their life is really all about. So the Hebrew word for corners here is the word kanaf. Can you say that with me? 1, 2, 3. Kanaf, very good. And then the Hebrew word for tassels is the fun word. It's called tzitzi. Say it with me. It's fun to say. 1, 2, 3. So then, in Numbers, we see here that there is a command to attach these tzitzis to your kanaf. And you've probably noticed it in pictures or video, or perhaps you've been to Israel where there are Torah-observant Jews who wear prayer shawls just like this one. And as they obey the text, they're adorned the way this one is. And this idea of corners and tassels and prayer shawls, it shows up throughout the scriptures in some pretty interesting places, including the book of Malachi, where it sounds like this. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go forth and skip about like calves from the stall. So the word that Malachi uses for wings is kanaf. It's the exact same word that's used in Numbers. It's the reference to the edge of your garment where your tzitzi, where your tassels are attached. So then legend began to grow that when the Messiah would show up, there would be healing in his kanaf, healing in his tzitzi. So hold on to that image. Understand that as a prequel to the little short story I'm going to share with you right now, one that you for sure all know. It's about Jesus, and it goes like this. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds pressed around him. And now a woman was there who had been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years, but could not be healed by anyone. And she came up behind Jesus and touched the edge of his cloak. And at once the bleeding stopped. And then Jesus asked, "Who was it who touched me?" And when they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds are surrounding you and pressing up against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I know that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she could not escape notice, she came trembling and fell down before him. In the presence of all the people, she explained why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." So Jesus is a rabbi. He is a law-abiding Jew. And he is either wearing a prayer shawl or at the corners of his garment are these tassels that are hanging. Why? Because he's observing the law, and you know that he's taking Numbers 15 very seriously. So then, when a woman pushes her way through the crowd, what kind of woman? A woman who has nowhere else to go. A woman who could find help nowhere else. A woman who was a refugee in a way from her own body. How? How could she live? How could she be looked after? So as she presses her way through, where does she grab Jesus? She grabs Jesus by the tassels. Why? Because she believes him to be the person that Malachi says he is. She believes that there is healing within his what? Within his wings. And then he says to her, "Daughter, go in peace." What's peace? In the Hebrew understanding, peace isn't the absence of conflict. The Hebraic understanding of peace is that in the middle of whatever trouble or terror or famine or election season that you are in, God's goodness and God's presence is with you. Even if things are insane on the outside, you can have wholeness and completeness on the inside. So when Jesus tells this woman to go in peace, essentially he's saying, I'm here. I'm here. You don't have to worry. You don't have to be afraid. You are not alone. I'm here. So what does this mean for you and I this morning? It is a reminder to you and me of who this world belongs to, of who rules this world. It's a reminder to you and I where true healing, where true health, where true peace come from, and what they look like. It's a reminder where you and I actually must always need to go for rescue and for refuge. It is a reminder that the peace of Christ, the presence of God, is our sustaining and future hope in the middle of, in spite of, especially in the middle of conflict and tragedy. So to make it even more specific for us today, I would say this. I would say that the U.S. election results doesn't mean salvation for the world, and nor does it mean the end of the world. And for those of you who are afraid of Donald Trump, the book of Ruth says to you and I, you don't need to be. Jesus is here. A theologian that we've quoted here a number of times, Miroslav Volf, actually posted something on his Twitter feed this week after all the frenzy of the election came up, and I thought I would share it with you this morning as something that I pray would give you peace. He said, now is the time to reaffirm our trust in Christ as the way of life. Care for poor, love for enemies, have courage to tell the truth to everyone. Or in the context of the edges, the corners, the tsetse, I would say, now is the time to grab the edge of Christ's garment, fully expecting him to be who he says he is, fully expecting him to heal, give us wholeness, completeness in the middle of chaos. Can you even imagine what Jesus can do for you right now? Because believe it or not, our God is a God who provides even during famine. Remember that Naomi asked her, so where did you glean today? Whose field? God bless whoever it was who took such good care of you. And Ruth told her mother-in-law, the man with whom I worked today, his name was Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, why, God bless that man. God hasn't quite walked out on us after all. He still loves us in bad times as well as good. And Naomi went on, that man, Ruth, is one of our circle of covenant redeemers, a close relative of ours. Remember, as we said last week, that this whole episode, this whole story of Ruth is actually taking place in a time of famine. Yet in this story, Naomi and Ruth have their fill. They have everything they need and then some. And where does it come from? It comes from the gleanings. What are the gleanings actually? They're actually the leftovers. So God actually provides out of the leftovers. There is so much that God has. So much is available to us that we can get our fill and then some based on what's just at the outskirts. So think about that this morning. If you find yourself in a season of famine, or if it's a threatening season for you, is it possible for even you today to find your healing and refuge and hope and protection and deliverance and sustenance in the healing wings of Jesus right now, in the middle of the mess? And do you believe that God in his goodness and providence has so much for you that he can supply all your needs even out of the leftovers? So may this be an encouragement to you this morning, that our God is a God who provides in the middle of famine. Does that mean all the things on the outside are fixed and hunky-dory? Not always. But what it does mean is that you can have peace and wholeness and a sustained hope in the middle of whatever you find yourself in. And people might say to you, oh, things worked out for you. Oh, happenstance. Can you believe? Oh, it was just out of sheer luck that happened to you. But you know better. You're the informed reader. You can see it from 30,000 feet and say, it might look that way to you, but I know that there's this thread. I know there's a God that guides my steps. I know that I have not been overlooked. I know that I have not been forgotten. So then, by extension, through Boaz and through you and I, there is now a calling, a response on our part to be the healing wings of Jesus for others through our actions. The way Naomi describes it in her last line here is this circle of covenant redeemers. Essentially what she's talking about is guardianship. Someone who cares, someone who's taken a shining to you, someone who has no legal obligation to look after you, but they have a different kind of obligation. We could call this group of people this morning a group of redeemed redeemers, or we could also call it the church. Because we are a group of people who recognize all that Jesus has done and supplied for us. And now out of that, we feel compelled to show that same grace and love and healing and sustenance to others. We pass it on. So this is the final scene of hope that you and I are left with at the end of chapter 2. Things aren't quite perfect, but God is still active, and soon enough, you and I will be able to see what he has been up to all along. So may we recognize this morning that this trouble, this problem with refugees and resident aliens has a long history on our planet. And every time we hear someone talking down or pushing away or villainizing, that is not God's words. Those are not his feelings. Instead, you and I are called to look after those who are unable to look after themselves. Yet with that in mind, we also know that we got to look after ourselves too. If you're killing yourself, doing good for others, that's not what God wants for you. And if you find yourself today in a place of emptiness and brokenness and afraid, if you are freaked out by what's happening in the world, the scriptures invite you to grab on to the healing wings of Jesus, fully believing that he is the Son of God and everything that he says he is. May that be a reminder to us of who rules the world, of who is present here, no matter who's in charge, who's in office. May it be a reminder to us this morning that our God is a God of leftovers and that he can feed us even during famine. But may that also compel us, remind us of all that's been done for us, that we might be the church, a group of redeemers, passing on to others what Jesus has passed on to us. Are you with me? Are you with me? Will you stand this morning? Let's close in prayer.